All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, I'm going to ask you to step right into the boardroom with me. We're putting on our Chief Scout's hat, and we're going to take a really clinical look at the latest intelligence coming out of Manchester United. Now, the rumor mill is just completely ablaze right now with talk of this massive summer rebuild, and all the chatter suggests that Michael Carrick might already have his ideal midfield three locked in. But, as anyone who follows football knows, what looks fantastic on the back pages doesn't always translate to actual dominance out there on the pitch. So we're treating this like a formal scouting dossier. We're going to strip away all the PR, look strictly at the numbers, and evaluate exactly what the club is planning.
And really, this is the high-stakes question hanging over the entire summer window. The word on the street, backed by some genuinely credible reports, is that an entire midfield rebuild, we're talking 3 distinct starting caliber players, could be secured for under £150 million. Now, in the modern Premier League era, $150 million for 3 starters, that almost sounds like a bargain, right? But is it actually a masterstroke of efficient recruitment, or is it just a fast track to absolute mediocrity? Let's break down the targets and find out.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our agenda for today's dossier. First, the midfield directive. Second, our target analysis of Carlos Baleba. Third, target analysis on Fernandes and Ederson. Fourth, the experience void. Fifth, the Premier League test. And finally, we'll wrap up with the final scout's verdict. Moving right into Section 1. The £15 million midfield directive.
So here is exactly how that $150 million budget is reportedly getting sliced up. First up, we've got Brighton's Carlos Baleba, commanding the biggest chunk of change at $60 million. He's just 20 years old. Next, there's West Ham's Fernandes, hovering right around that $55 million mark, also in his early 20s. And finally, Atalanta's Ederson, the oldest of the bunch at 27, who could be secured for a highly achievable $35 to $43 million. You add all that up, and boom, you hit that $150 million threshold perfectly. On paper, sure, the accounting works flawlessly, but, football isn't played on a spreadsheet.
So why this trio in particular? Well, the intel suggests the board is swarming these 3 players like flies to honey, and it's for 3 very specific reasons. Number 1, reasonable transfer fees. Like we just saw, $150 million for 3 players fits the club's budget seamlessly. Number 2, market availability. These are deals that are highly actionable right now. And number 3, there's this strong, kind of romanticized desire from the players themselves to actually wear the Manchester United badge. They want to be here. But look, as a scout, my job is to ask the tough questions. Just because they're affordable, available, and willing, does that actually mean they're good enough to win us a title?
Which brings us to Section 2, Target Analysis, Carlos Baleba. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer disconnect between the club's PR spin and the harsh reality of the actual eye test. The boardroom chatter, which has been heavily leaked to the press, claims United love Baleba based on some highly rated, almost secret, hidden data. They highlight his great potential and talk up, actually they're calling it a return to form. But look at the scout's view. Anyone can just look at the basic metrics. His pass completion, poor. His ball-carrying stats, lacking. And this whole narrative of his return to form completely ignores the fact that the guy could barely get off the bench at Brighton between January and mid-April. He essentially had one standout game against a really struggling Chelsea side.
And guys, this is absolutely a critical warning for any recruitment department. The club is heavily hyping up these secret data pools as if they've somehow discovered the holy grail. But data without context? It's literally just noise. When basic foundational metrics like passing accuracy and defensive actions don't leap off the page, you have to seriously question if a $60 million valuation is based on current reality or if it's just blind hope. We just cannot let a few good weeks mask an entire season of struggle.
All right, let's move to Section 3, Target Analysis, Fernandes and Ederson.
First, let's talk about that £55 million link to West Ham's Fernandes. Where is this even coming from? Well, it's heavily driven by internal club connections. United's recruitment chief, Jason Wilcox, has strong historic ties to Fernandes from their days at Southampton. Plus, the very scout who originally brought Fernandes to West Ham is now sitting at United. Add in the fact that if West Ham faces any financial or relegation struggles, he becomes a super easy target. He's viewed as a willing addition. But again, putting my scout hat back on, I have to point out, he completely lacks the elite defensive anchor status this team is desperately crying out for right now.
And then we have Ederson from Atalanta. He's 27 years old. I really need you to just hold on to that number for a second because it highlights a massive, critical flaw in his scouting profile.
At 27 years old, a player like Ederson should be entering the absolute prime of his career. Now, sure, he's an aggressive workhorse, a total all-action player available for a relatively cheap $35 million. But look at his pedigree. 0 Premier League appearances,
Literally 0 World Cup caps for Brazil. For a club that needs an intimidating, elite-level presence in the middle of the park, Ederson represents a massive gamble. Yes, he's a cheap third option, but relying on him to fundamentally transform the midfield against Europe's absolute elite, that's incredibly naive.
Let's move on to Section 4, the experience void.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates the terrifying tactical gap in this entire strategy. Look at this age split. If you sign Balaba and Fernandes, and then you pair them with our current standout Kabi Menu, you are looking at a midfield core where literally everyone is 20 or in their very early 20s. That is an astonishing void of top-flight experience. You just cannot build a spine capable of winning the Premier League or the Champions League solely on players whose brains are still developing tactically. It doesn't work.
Because think about what is actively missing here. None of these three targets, not Bailey, not Fernandes, not Ederson, actually replace what a prime Casemiro brought to this squad. We're completely missing elite aerial ability. We're missing that top-tier, almost telepathic defensive awareness. We're missing an intimidating physical presence. We desperately need a tactical anchor that opposing managers actively have to plan their entire week around, and honestly, none of the rumored 150 million trio provide this.
Which takes us to Section 5, the Premier League test.
I have to read you this quote from the Source Intelligence because it perfectly sums up my clinical frustration with this whole boardroom plan. It says, I don't think that strikes fear into the midfield of Bournemouth, let alone Liverpool, City, or Arsenal. I call this the fear factor metric. And right now, this proposed trio completely fails it. Opposing fans and players aren't intimidated by us anymore. They're honestly just surprised if we manage to play well. That absolutely has to change.
Let's systematically break down exactly why this trio fails the Premier League test. First, it's that massive void of top-flight experience we just talked about. Second, the glaring lack of a true physical defensive anchor to actually protect the back four. Third, this entire 150 million spend is built entirely on the hope of potential rather than the rock-solid guarantee of proven talent. And finally, it completely fails to intimidate elite opposition. If you field Balaba, Fernandes, and Ederson against the very best, you're literally setting yourself up to be overrun. This isn't a masterclass in squad building, it's a fast track to long-term mediocrity.
Finally, Section 6, Final Scout's Verdict.
So the crucial point is this: it really comes down to a choice between romanticism and pragmatism. Right now, it feels like the recruitment team is blinded by romanticism. They want to sign players simply because they're cheap, they're available, and they have this childhood dream of wearing the shirt. But let's be real, that's the easy way out. True pragmatism is doing the hard work. A real director of football needs to go out there and persuade elite, proven, top-tier talent, players in the mold of a Sandro Tonali or an Ederson from those elite brackets, to come and actually win titles. You have to sell them the project, even if they aren't naturally begging to come. So I'm going to leave the boardroom and all of you with this final provocative question. It really defines our entire future. Do we just want to sign players who want to come because it's easy? Or do we actually have the ambition to go out and fight for the players who can win us the league? Think about that next time you see a transfer rumor pop up. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.